Welcome to another series of the professional development during the annual Legislative Conference 2020. It is my pleasure to introduce to you a dear friend and colleague at one point, Rachel Broussard, a 15-year-old educator and one who is now the Dean of Curriculum and Instruction at Null Middle High School in her hometown, Sheldon ISD. Today, Rachel will talk about one of her favorite topics we entitled When the Bell Rings, Rethinking Culturally Responsive Pedagogy. Listen carefully, there'll be lots of great information, and at the end of the session, there will be 2 questions that we will ask you to respond to so that you can download your 75 minutes of CEU certificate. And Rachel, with that, I would like to turn it over to you.
All right, thank you so much for this opportunity. I am super excited about talking about this because where we are in society right now, it definitely pushes us to talk about this topic. So we're starting with When the Bell Rings, Rethinking Culturally Responsive Pedagogy. Again, I'm Rachel Broussard. I am the Dean of Instruction at Knoll Middle School in Sheldon ISD, and I am also a member of several different organizations that focus on this particular topic. So let's dive right in. Let's talk about it. So let's talk about 2020. This is where we are. I don't know about you all, but I am a sci-fi nerd, and I was so looking forward to 2020 having flying cars and all sorts of different things that we saw in Back to the Future. For all of my 80s babies and 90s kids, we loved what we were seeing. We loved what we thought the future was going to hold. What we didn't think of was that when we got to 2020, we would still be dealing with some of the racial injustices and some of the cultural issues that have definitely arose during this time period. One of the biggest things that we see in 2020 outside of a worldwide pandemic would be that people of color are still under attack. Now, how do we deal with those things knowing that we're educators and we're going back into the classroom, whether it be virtually in front of a screen as we are now, or if I'm going to see students and they're in front of a mask. But we have to definitely focus on what are our kids feeling? What are they dealing with right now that is going to impact their psyche, impact their education, impact everything that they are, who they are as a person. So one of the things that we have to talk about when we talk about 2020 is the cultural impact that it has had on all of us, not just our students, but us as educators. When we talk about 2020, we will have to talk about this resurgence of civil rights movements, this resurgence of protests, this resurgence of social justice, which is a part of this equity lens that we definitely are responsible for in education. When we talk about educational equity, we cannot talk about it without talking about culturally responsive pedagogy. Our kids deserve it. Our kids need what we are wanting to provide. Now, let's talk about 2020 again. Let's talk about how it started. Just in January, we had so many things that happened. We talked about, we had the death of Kobe Bryant. We had a whole monarchy go into disarray because of the leaving of Harry and Meghan over here to the United States. And as we're watching this unfold, as we're looking at our TVs and we're watching all of these things transpire, we also see people of color being attacked. We see people of color being killed on TV. And we have to know that our kids are ingesting all of those different things. And are we ready as educators to be able to change their narrative, to be able to give them something that they're able to hold on to and be able to utilize in their future, which is education. It's something, knowledge is something that can't be taken away from you, right? So one of the biggest things that we definitely want to talk about, we want to change the trajectory of 2020. We definitely want to make sure that the last part of this year is going to be a great year for our kids because we are intentional about teaching them what they need to know. So just getting started, most people, when we hear culture, you know, a lot of us, especially people of color, we want to do it for the culture, right? But do we actually know what culture is? What is your culture? What do you ascribe to? What are your social behaviors, your norms, the human societies that you are a part of, the knowledge and beliefs, the arts that you have a part of you, laws, customs, capabilities? What are those things that make you? So just personally, I'll tell you that outside of being a proud Texan and a proud Black woman and a proud Creole of Creole heritage, I will tell you that I also ascribe to an educator culture. I am definitely a true advocate for education, for public education at that. We need to understand what culture is in order for us to be able to transform our classrooms, in order for us to be able to transform what our students actually need us for. They need to see themselves, but they also need their education transformed so that they can have positive futures. So before we even get into understanding what culturally responsive pedagogy is, we have to understand what culture is. And one of the things that I try to share with people that I do professional development with and different trainings is, when was the last time somebody asked you about your culture? Just as an adult. Sometimes we get so busy with what we are required to do, what we have in our day-to-day busy lives, that we forget that there is something else that we have to do, and that is understand who we are, and then understand who the person that I interact with on a regular is as well. And it's not just, oh, I know you as an educator, or I know you as what I see on the surface. I have to be able to understand who you are and what you come from in order for me to be able to understand the totality of you. And it's the same thing with our students. We have to understand who they are, what they're capable of doing, and what their culture has given them, the background knowledge that has been implanted in them that is going to impact what they're able to do in the classroom. So when we talk about culture, don't forget that culture isn't just, oh, I'm a Black person or Hispanic person, or, oh, I'm from a specific state that has all of these different things. Culture goes so much deeper, and we have to understand that in order for us to be culturally responsive when it comes to our pedagogy. So one of the things that I definitely love and I was able to do this summer was to read through this awesome book by Zaretta Hammond, and it's Culturally Responsive Teaching in the Brain. And she doesn't just talk about the culturally responsive piece. She talks about the linguistic piece. She talks about how it deals with the cognitive capabilities of our students. We are dealing with something that is so multifaceted and so complex, but it's important for us to understand what it is in order for us to truly get to the root of any of our achievement gaps, any problems that our students are having when it comes to academics. We know that most of the things that we have to deal with are, again, cognitive based, and we have to understand who our kids are and how they learn in order for us to be effective. So when we talk about culturally responsive pedagogy, it again goes to the educational equity component that I talked about earlier. It goes through all of these different components and when you see the information here, you see that I have multicultural education, social justice education, and culturally responsive education. Too many times there are misconceptions that all of these things are synonymous, and they definitely aren't. One of the big things that Ms. Hammond talks about, Dr. Hammond talks about in her book, is for us to understand the difference. And a lot of times in education, This is why we have to rethink what we call culturally responsive pedagogy, because we always think that, oh, well, I acknowledged Cinco de Mayo, or I acknowledged Hanukkah or Kwanzaa, or I acknowledged all of these different things and put a stamp on it. It's culturally responsive pedagogy. That's not quite it. That's actually multicultural education. When you are acknowledging people and their cultural significance when it comes to holidays and celebrations and those type of things, and you're teaching other people about that, that's actually multicultural education, which is good. It is supposed to be that way. You're supposed to have multicultural education be a part of this equity narrative. What we have to really understand, though, is that multicultural education is not the totality of what culturally responsive education is. So one of the biggest things that we have to make sure that we know and we understand when we are putting all of this together, when we're going back to our campuses and we're saying, hey, I want to be the leader, I want to come in and I want to change the narrative, I want culturally responsive pedagogy to be about everything that we do. It can't just be this surface level of multicultural education. Do we need to include that? Absolutely. Of course, everyone needs to know what multicultural education is. We do need to embrace other cultures and we need to understand it and celebrate all of those different things, but it's not the crutch of the crust of what culturally responsive education is. Now, let's talk about social justice, because we see it in society right now. People are highlighting inequity. People are letting other individuals know that, listen, we understand all of the systematic issues that have caused our people to be pushed down, run over, and we are not standing for that right now. So when we're teaching kids about social justice, we're teaching them to recognize inequity. We're teaching them to understand what inequity is and how it impacts them. Again, it's not just what culturally responsive education is. So again, misconception is if I teach multicultural education, if I teach social justice education, I'm culturally responsive. Not necessarily the case. So let's get into really what culturally responsive education is and the pedagogy behind it. It is understanding who I'm teaching, understanding the background, metacognitive skills that they already have, and I'm utilizing that inside of my classroom. I'm utilizing that in curriculum. I'm utilizing that in everything that I do in order to be able to bridge the gap between what my students are supposed to learn when it comes to state standards and all of the different skills that they're required to learn before they graduate, before they're promoted. And then I need to be able to take who they are and what they come with and be able to say, hey, I'm intertwining both of these things and I'm helping you to be able to process all of the information that you need to know in your own lens. Those things are what the true nature of culturally responsive pedagogy is. If I incorporate that into my curriculum, and it doesn't matter what curriculum it is, we can go from core content curriculum to elective curriculum. Culturally responsive pedagogy needs to be embedded in all of those things. But if we are not truly conscious of what we need to do in order to get a whole systematic focus on this, it's not just one of those things where I remember a colleague telling me, well, Rachel, I changed the names in the math problems. I'm good, right? No, that's not gonna work. One of the things that we have to do, I mean, just because you changed Sally to Keisha or John to Juan, that's not being culturally responsive. We have to make sure that we are not just looking at, I'm making sure that our kids are represented in a math problem. I have to make sure that I understand who these kids are. I understand how they learn. I understand what was given to them, how their home life is teaching them, what their culture embodies that helps them to be able to process information And then I am incorporating that into the lessons and structures and curriculum that is embodied in everything that we do in education. So again, when that bell rings, we have to not only know our content, we have to know our kids. And if we don't know our kids, then we will never be culturally responsive. We will never be able to implement culturally responsive pedagogy. And I am truly an advocate for this particular topic because I had to think about when when somebody thought enough about me to think about how I learn in respects to how I grew up. Or so I told you that when we talk about culture, I come from a Creole background. Although I'm a proud Texan, I have roots in Louisiana. You can't throw a rock in Louisiana without hitting a Broussard. That's the ongoing joke. But we have to know, I remember sitting at home, sitting at my aunt's house in Louisiana and hearing the change in dialect and then hearing the change in language. And although I never learned the broken French that is Creole, I remember understanding that, okay, if they're switching, then they are using that because they're trying to communicate and they didn't necessarily know what they wanted to say in English. So they had to communicate that in the broken French that is Creole. So when we understand kids and we understand when they're struggling because they're trying to explain something, let's say I have a Haitian student who is in my class and I see the frustration in their face because I know this information is, but I can't explain this to you because I'm not necessarily as well versed in English as I would like to be. But we have to be able to provide different opportunities and avenues for our students to be able to show what they know. Years ago, when I taught adult education, it was one of the most enriching opportunities that I had. I was able to teach adults who were taking the citizenship test to, basically I was teaching them English. One of the different things that I was able to tell one of my friends was that I had two doctors from Peru in my class. They would come at night and they would try to learn English and we would teach different things to them. I would tell people all the time, those guys were smarter than me. They had intellect out of this world. They were doctors. They just had a communication barrier. And a lot of the times we don't understand the barriers that we don't understand the great intelligence that our kids have. We don't understand the barriers that are between us aren't necessarily because they don't know. It's because we haven't dug deep into understanding who they are and how they learn. So when we talk about culturally responsive education, when we talk about that pedagogy, we have to be sure to know who our kids are. If we don't know them, if we don't know what their background is and take the time to know, then we're just giving them information how we know it or how the standards tell us to do it. And I'm not saying throw the standards out the window. As an administrator, I would definitely not tell anybody that, right? Because we have to teach the kids what they need to know. But I would definitely tell everyone that comes in contact with me as an educator, you have to know your kids. You have to build those relationships. And not only build relationships, but make sure that you are holding all kids to a high standard, not just the ones that you know can actually do what it is that's already present in the curriculum. Sometimes it just takes you digging deeper into how kids learn and what their background is and what their cultural connection is in order for them to be able to be successful. So let's keep moving on. I definitely want to talk about where do we start? So Rachel, you've given me all of this information and you're telling me I need to do all of these different things, but I'm not quite certain I know where to start. So I have to tell you this, we must always start with students not only seeing themselves in the content, but seeing themselves successful in the content. One of the biggest things that I struggled with as an educator, as a teacher, when I was still in the classroom, I taught history and I taught English. And one of the things that I hated for our kids was that it seemed like everything that we were putting in front of them, if they were able to see themselves in the curriculum, if they were able to be represented, it was a struggle narrative, right? And I tried to coin this phrase, struggle narrative, to get people to understand that I don't have to, if I'm teaching history and the only time my African American students see themselves is as slaves, or if my Native American students only see themselves as the ones who were here first, but killed off because of different things or pushed off land, if my Hispanic students who are from different Latin American countries only see themselves as struggling immigrants, then that's a struggle narrative. We have to make sure that our kids see themselves successful in any type of narrative in our curriculum. And it shouldn't just be, I see this too, and it really bothers me sometimes. It shouldn't just be, oh, well, I'm going to show you entertainers, or I'm going to show you different artists, or those type of things. It has to be people who they can associate with. I am just like this person, and I am able to identify with them. I'm able to hold on with this positive narrative that you are presenting to me. Now, I'm not saying that they don't need to hear about the struggle, because they do. They need to understand the totality of everything that is going on. But we have to make sure that our students see themselves successful. And it starts with what we put in the curriculum. If what I'm reading always tells me that I'm going to be down and out and depressed and all these different things, and I don't have anything that shows me being triumphant, then we are doing a disservice to our students. So make sure when you're looking at your curriculum, when you are going into different places where you have a say in what our kids are going to actually ingest, make sure that you speak up for the least of these. Make sure you speak up for our students and what they are, who they are, and what they're capable of being. One of the biggest things that I remember having a conversation with a student one time, one of my Hispanic students, and uh, it was, of course, kids will be kids and they'll make fun of each other. And one of my students was like, well, he was making fun of me because I was speaking Spanish. And I was like, okay. I said, I'm gonna have something for you tomorrow. I want you to just remember to remind me. And I remember telling her, I went to the store that night and I got a newspaper, and I went to the job section and I gave it to her the next day. I said, hey, I don't want you to do the warm up. I want you to do this. I want you to go through this warm up, and I want you to circle every time you see bilingual. So, and she was like, what, Ms. Broussard, what are you talking about? I was like, no, just do this for me and we'll talk about it later. So she went through and she was like, wow, Ms. Broussard, it's a lot of jobs that require people to be bilingual here in Houston. I said, so when you think about who you are and what you have, clearly your friend here who's, just being a middle schooler, being a little runt at times, but he doesn't understand that you have a skill set. You have something that is going to benefit you in the long run. Yes, you might still be learning different things. People who have known English all their lives. I mean, try to learn new words all the time, but you have a particular skill set that is going to benefit you. And we have to make sure that our kids understand that. One of the big things that when we understand culture, when we understand how kids do different things, it will help us to be able to give them resources and lessons and activities that are geared towards what they love and what they're able to do. If you see a kid, a lot of our boys, especially our Hispanic and African American boys, they love to work with their hands, and they're able to, I may not be able to articulate what I want to show you when it comes to, let's say we're doing Pythagorean theorem in math, and the kids, I might not be able to write this reflection, but miss, if you give me something that I could work with my hands, if I could build something, I could show you where I get the slope, or I could show you how I do all of these different things. And that is what the we're talking about when we say culturally responsive pedagogy. Are we utilizing the skill sets of our kids? Are we utilizing that background information, their cognitive ability to be able to, that is rooted in their culture of what they've been taught, because that is the grit that has been given to them? Are we utilizing that and being able to tell them, hey, listen, I want you to show me what you know in respect to these standards that I have to teach you? So again, remember, make sure we know what they can do, and we got to limit the struggle narrative. Definitely limit the struggle narrative. One of the great things, and I know we're not in DC as we usually would be when it comes to ALC, but one of the great things that I love and I try to do every time I go to DC is go to the African American History Museum. It was the first time that I went, it was life-changing. Of course, I was a big crybaby, came out, just tears everywhere, makeup messed up, Mac just everywhere. But what I got from that was our story is embedded in we are all Americans. Our story is embedded in somebody else, in this story, this great narrative of our nation. And when I teach this, of course, as a history teacher, I nerd it out, right? But when I teach this, I can teach all of this in respect to who I have in my classroom. I can make sure that they see themselves successful. There were African Americans in the American Revolution. It wasn't just Crispus Attucks who died first, right? We have to make sure that everybody knows that all of these things can be taught together. We can make sure that our kids are represented, and we can make sure that we are teaching from a place that helps them to understand how what they know connects to what I'm trying to teach them. All right, so let's talk about where we are right now, though. So when we talk about culturally responsive pedagogy, we cannot take away from the fact that our kids are digital natives. Most of our kids knew how to operate an iPhone before they knew how to talk, right? I mean, if you see kids now, if you're calling your friend and you're wondering why you keep getting sent to voicemail, it's probably because their infant is watching their YouTube video. And I've learned how to scroll that thing over, right? I might not be able to talk, but I definitely know how to operate this technology. So one of the things that we have to understand when we're dealing with this generation, not only do we have to be culturally responsive when we talk about their backgrounds, and we have to understand that they're part of a culture of their own when it comes to being digital natives. Now, many of them, and I know we are going into a virtual situation right now where we are going to be teaching from a screen as we are doing right now, but we have to make sure that we are incorporating all of the things that are them when it comes to being digital natives. We can't be the old runts or, I'm a Zennial. So I grew up in the era of AOL when you had to dial up. Everybody knew that tone, right? You got mail. Or I had to play Oregon Trail on the big, bulky, ugly Apple with like we see all these great pixels and everything else. Back then you got green, brown, and black. That was about it that you saw on your screen, right? But when we understand where we now, as a Zennial, I embrace it all because technology literally transformed as I grew up, as I came into adulthood, right? But for some of us who are of different generations, we can't say, oh, well, these kids, we don't have to do everything on this. Or we think about, did anybody ever think that we would be in a situation where our whole life would be online? Nobody ever thought that we would be in a situation in education like most of us were in the last semester of our 2019-2020 school year. No one ever thought that we would go home from spring break and not return. I don't think anybody ever thought of that. And then we'd have to create a platform that is we have to create a teaching platform that is going to not only teach kids, but I have to make sure that they also I'm being culturally responsive, that I am building relationships. How do I do that through a screen? How do I make sure that kids know that I value who they are through a screen? Well, we have to make sure that we are in a position to open up and learn as well. We can't get to a point where we're saying, well, back in my day, I learned about this and this was the only thing that I needed to know. Well, we're not preparing, especially when we talk about some of our older generation. I'm not calling anybody old. Don't y'all go around and tell anybody that I called anybody old, right? But our seasoned, there we go, seasoned generation, we were preparing them for different types of jobs. We were preparing them for a different type of society. Today, we are preparing our kids for jobs right now. Even today, we are preparing kids for jobs that don't even exist right now. But we have to give them the skills of understanding not only who they are, but who other people are. We have to be able, they are literally going to work in a global society. Right now, they're working in a global society online. So we have to understand who our digital natives are. We have to know how they're able to critically think. We have to be able to get them to collaborate, even if it's online. Even if I am, right now, I'm having a conversation with all of you who are watching. We are learning together. We are I'm giving information, we're sharing information in order to make all of us better so that we can continue to be lifelong learners. And we have to make sure that our kids understand that too. We have to make sure that our students are capable of going into a world where they're going to be a variety of people, a variety of tasks, and they have to understand how to be flexible. They have to understand how to critically think. And they also have to be, we have to teach them to be culturally responsive. They have to understand how to be cooperative. They have to understand how to respect the cultures of other people. So we are doing so much in this interesting time in education. We have to be able to have the skills, the skill set that is going to help us to be able not only to better ourselves, but to better our students. So again, most of us are digital immigrants. We are new to some of the things that our kids can probably do in seconds. But in order for us to continue to thrive in education, we have to make sure that we understand who we're dealing with. We understand that they're part of a culture of virtual understanding, digital understanding, and we have to understand that too. So one of the things that I definitely want to talk about, getting back to the culturally responsive piece, is how do we deal with that when how do we have these approaches when it comes to virtual learning? So one of the things that I told my teachers at my school is that, again, kids have to be able to see themselves, and it doesn't matter what content area you are a part of. Kids are definitely wanting to know that you care about who they are and what they can bring to the table. And they want to see other people who look like them. They want to see, girls want to see themselves in things other than, oh, I'm pretty, or, oh, I'm going to be, a mom one day, or, oh, I'm going to be, how about, oh, you're going to be an engineer one day? Or how about, oh, you might be the next vice president of the United States. That's where we are right now, right? Our kids are able to see so many different things, but we have to make sure that in our curriculum, in our lessons, in our teaching focus, we are making sure that our kids are seeing themselves in positive lights. So one of the things that I would suggest to people when they are doing this virtual learning, when we are rethinking how we're going to be culturally responsive behind a screen, we have to make sure that anything can be themed. Anything can be, we can bring about culturally responsive or culturally relevant pedagogy in all aspects of education. And that definitely deals with our virtual world, right? So one of the things, and I put this chart together because I really want people to know that we can theme anything, right? So say I'm a science teacher and I really want I want my students of color to know that not only am I making sure that I'm putting together lessons that are amazing, that are cognitively connected to your culture, I am also making sure that you see yourself in like the positive things that people are able to do with this content, you can do it too. And let me show you who did it before you that looks like you. So you can do something like sensational scientists, and we can highlight some of the different people who are scientists right now. This will be a great time to talk about the people on the front line who are at this epicenter of COVID-19 vaccinations, making sure that we find, some sort of medication that's going to be able to help our citizens to get through some of the complications that are happening with this particular virus. So if we are talking about those things, and I'm able to show you that, and her name, I'm totally blank with her, but she is a scientist that is working on the vaccine. She's a Black woman who is at the forefront of this. If I'm able to show you that and you love this particular part of science, and I've been able to build you up with that cognitive ability that's connected to your culture, and now you see someone who's able to do this that looks like you, God, that's the magic. That is what is going to help our kids to be able to keep pushing forward. I'm going to continue to go down this track when I get to high school. And then when I get to college, I'm going to make sure that I'm continuing on so that I can do those things, because somebody in my educational track, my teachers, my administrators, my counselors, they made sure that I saw myself around my school. So that's a whole nother thing that I definitely want to address, is that it's not just in the classroom. When we talk about seeing ourselves, like, we can put sensational scientists all over the school when we actually get back to school, right? But if I also have it on our website, if I have it in my Google Classroom, if I have it as I'm meeting on Microsoft Teams, I'm making sure that all of my kids see themselves. You have marvelous mathematicians, remarkable readers or writers, you have honorable history makers and historians. You can have a day where it's girl power goals, right? Mentor Mondays, that can be anybody. Who do you consider a mentor? Who would be somebody that is good to follow to make sure that I'm ascribing to be like that person, right? Trailblazer Tuesdays, again, that can be anyone. Who's setting a trail right now? Who's a trailblazer? Wisdom Wednesday, Wacky STEM Wednesday. We actually did this with my district during the pandemic. We got on Twitter and we put different things out every Wednesday that dealt with STEM, so that our kids at home could work with their parents on just little projects that you can do with everyday things. So we have a great deal of opportunities to put our kids out in the forefront and to be able to let them see themselves in a positive light. One of the things, as I'm continuing to go forward, these are some of the things that we can put in our virtual atmosphere for kids to be able to see. So I'm gonna be honest with you, there aren't many times, even in a brick and mortar school, that I've been able to see our educators put these things up. And that's not a dig to teachers. It's just that some people just don't know that these things are available to them for them to be able to get our kids engaged and involved. So if I have a poster in my virtual class or my brick and mortar class that says mathematically gifted and Black, wow. First thing I can just see kids coming into the poster and being like, okay, who is that? I've never heard of them, miss. Who is, well, guess what? How about you Google that person for me? Maybe I can play dumb and say, oh, well, I don't know who that is either. Can you find out for me and tell me who that person is, so that I can know more about this person? We've created intrigue, right? We've created an interest. And now I'm sending you to do some research. So that's inquiry. And they are doing the work to be able to help those critical thinking skills and be able to say, I learned about this person. I'm coming to tell you about this person. So I'm summarizing, I'm giving you information. Our kids need to be able to see that. They need to be able to see that. They need to be able to see themselves in it. And they need to be able to have that opportunity to be able to go off and find new things that are related to them. So any of these things can be awesome to put out. If the first thing I see when I open my Google Classroom is a poster that looks like this, and there are some questions that go along with it, maybe something that says, do you know any of these individuals? If you don't, take a minute to look up all of these different things and tell me what you know about this person. So we definitely want to make sure that our kids see themselves in what they're doing. We want to make sure that they see themselves in a positive light. And we want to make sure that they have all sorts of models in front of them that is going to be positive, that is going to help them to want to embrace who they are and be able to excel academically. So let's continue on to be able to say, I definitely want to make sure that everyone knows that we need to embrace culture. We have to make sure that our kids are at the forefront of everything that we do, because without our students, they are stakeholders, right? They are the ones who are at the foundation of everything that we do. A lot of times I have to tell people sometimes, because sometimes it's easy for us to get into this mantra of, oh, woe is me, everything, I don't know if I could do this. But when we realize that our kids are worth it, when we realize that our kids need us, then it puts another fire under us. One of the things that, and I have this in my virtual classroom, there's Bitmoji me, right? But it has one of my favorite quotes, which is by Frederick Douglass, which it says, it's easier to build strong children than to repair broken men. And with that being my favorite quote, it's also part of my why. The entire time that I've been in education, in these 15 years that I've been in public education, I have always been in a Title I school. I have always taught minority children. And I have been able to see firsthand what culturally responsive pedagogy does for students. I've also been able to say that by me understanding my kids and understanding what they have inside of them, the background that they bring from their cultures, the background that they bring from being a part of a variety of cultures, right? If I'm able to bottle that magic and be able to connect all of these things together, then I am also able to build a productive member of society who's going to be a part of so many different cultural aspects. They're going to do great things. And of course, 15 years in a game, right? I have kids come back all the time. I have had, in the last couple of years, had my first group of students become teachers here in my district. And it's a great, awesome accomplishment for me that they come back and say, Ms. Broussard, you were the reason that I wanted to become an educator. So, and we do it. Sometimes we think that we probably won't see it, right? We're putting all this work in and we won't see the fruits of our labor, but it will come back. And we have to make sure that we are equipping our kids with everything that they need, and we're making sure that they are at the forefront. One of my other quotes that I feel also deals with what we're talking about today, which is culturally responsive pedagogy. One of the main things that I love, Nelson Mandela was always about education. He made sure that that was one of his biggest charges when he became president in South Africa. And he has one of my favorite educational quotes as well. Education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. So we know where we are right now in society. We know that actual weapons are being used to take down people of color. We know that actual weapons are being used to deter us from actually using our voice. We need to make sure that our students know, especially our students of color, we need to make sure that they know that the biggest weapon that you have is your education, the knowledge that is being instilled in you. So when we are doing everything that we can to ensure that we are incorporating culturally responsive pedagogy throughout the entire system of education, all of its structures, then what we are doing is we're tearing down those other weapons because we're educating others. We are making sure that we are building a positive generation of individuals that will change this world. I am truly excited about what we are going to be able to do collectively. And when we are in the room and we are able to change any of the narrative that comes to education, when it comes to curriculum, when it comes to the systems in place, when it comes to how we deal with discipline, how we deal with the policies and procedures and everything that we have in education, remember to keep culturally responsive pedagogy at the forefront. We have to make sure that we are in the room. Not only are we in the room, but our voice is heard when it comes to education and educating our students of color. All of our kids deserve culturally responsive pedagogy. All of our kids deserve it because it's going to help all of our kids to be able to be productive citizens of society. So I hope that you learned something really great today. I hope that I was able to give you something that is going to resonate and you are able to take that back to all of your districts and your schools and everything else. I hope that you got something that is going to help you, like even tomorrow, like Rachel, you gave me something that is truly beneficial and I'm going to be able to use that. I will tell you that that bit.ly link that is on the screen will take you to some resources, virtual resources that you'll be able to use in your classes if you're still online. I hope that it's helpful. I hope that you learned something and remember to embrace the culture and keep in touch. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rachel. That was a lot of information, a lot of good information. And people will take those pointers that you gave, I'm pretty sure, because we've all been looking for how do we embrace the new virtual setting and still get the work done. So just remember that at the end of the session, you will get 2 questions, and I'll tell you what they are. The first one is cite one fallacy that is being baked into some programs. And the other one is when embracing culturally responsive pedagogy and virtual tools to implement in a digital platform, briefly explain one core research-driven component of culturally responsive pedagogy one should consider. And those will also appear on the screen when you before you download your certificate for attendance. So again, thank you, my dear friend, Rachel. Well done. And I'm sure we learned quite a bit.
All right, thank you so much.